You will never touch a single dime of my money. My husband Marcus leaned back in his chair at our divorce hearing, casually flashing his solid gold Rolex to make sure everyone in the courtroom noticed his wealth. Sitting right behind him, his mistress Jasmine gave a nasty little smirk, crossing her arms in triumph. She does not deserve a single dime, she whispered, making sure her voice carried across the silent room. I just sat there perfectly calm, my hands folded on the table. The judge picked up the single sealed envelope I had submitted as my only piece of evidence. He broke the seal, pulled out the document, and began to read. He stopped, adjusted his glasses, read it again, and then actually burst out laughing. The entire courtroom went dead silent as the judge leaned into his microphone and said, "Oh, this is good." Within 5 seconds, the arrogant smirks completely vanished from Marcus and Jasmine. Their faces turned pale with absolute, undeniable terror. You see, they thought I was just a clueless accountant they could easily walk all over and throw out into the street. They severely underestimated who they were dealing with. My name is Nia Davenport. I am 34 years old, and my revenge was completely legal. Before I tell you exactly what was in that envelope and how I sent my ex-husband and his entire toxic family straight to federal prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing arrogant people get exactly the karma they deserve. Atlanta is often called the Mecca of Black excellence. It is a city where Black wealth is visible, celebrated, and fiercely competitive. We lived in that glittering world. We attended the high society charity galas in Buckhead, rubbing shoulders with politicians, elite developers, and local celebrities. To everyone looking in from the outside, Marcus and I were the ultimate power couple. He was the charismatic CEO of Davenport Commercial Real Estate, and I was his beautiful, supportive wife standing quietly by his side in all the magazine spreads. But the cameras never capture the whole story. They never show the invisible heavy lifting that happens in the shadows. The truth is, Marcus was the face of the company, but I was the spine. I am a forensic accountant specializing in white-collar financial crimes. My entire career is built on tracking hidden money, auditing complex corporate structures, and spotting financial anomalies that other people miss. When Marcus and I first started dating 8 years ago, his so-called empire was nothing but a fragile house of cards. He had massive ambition and a silver tongue, but his financial records were an absolute catastrophe. He was months away from total bankruptcy and completely oblivious to the fact that the IRS was about to audit him into oblivion. I stepped in and saved him. I spent thousands of hours analyzing his chaotic ledgers, restructuring his toxic debts, and implementing strict financial controls. I essentially rebuilt his company from the ground up. I sacrificed my own career advancement, turning down promotions at my firm, just so I could dedicate my evenings and weekends to cleaning up his messes. While Marcus was out playing golf at exclusive country clubs, shaking hands with wealthy investors, and taking all the credit for his brilliant business acumen, I was the one making sure his checks actually cleared. I was the silent engine driving his success, operating entirely behind the scenes so his ego would never be bruised. For a while, the sacrifice felt worth it because we were building a future together. As my financial strategies took effect, the company exploded in value. We started closing massive commercial properties across Georgia. The wealth poured in, allowing us to move into a sprawling, custom-built mansion in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. I poured my soul into designing every single room of that house, carefully choosing the imported marble and the custom lighting, creating a perfect sanctuary for the family we had always planned to start. But success has a funny way of revealing a person's true character. When the company valuation officially hit $50 million, Marcus completely transformed. The humble, grateful man I married vanished entirely, replaced by an arrogant stranger who deeply believed his own hype. He started believing the flattering magazine articles that called him a self-made genius. He conveniently forgot who handed him the blueprint and who kept him out of federal prison. The late nights at the office turned into extravagant weekend trips he claimed were strictly for networking. His designer wardrobe got flashier, his ego grew dangerously large, and his respect for me completely evaporated. He started treating me less like a devoted partner and more like an annoying auditor who knew far too much about his past incompetence. I became a mirror reflecting the truth he wanted to hide. My quiet, steadfast support was no longer enough to feed his massive ego. He needed a constant audience. He needed someone who would worship the ground he walked on without knowing the messy, incompetent reality of how he got there. He needed someone easily impressed by the flashy cars and the VIP tables. And that is exactly why he brought Jasmine into the picture. Jasmine Cole was officially hired as the Assistant Director of Operations, but her real job was feeding my husband's delusion of grandeur. She was 28, fiercely ambitious, and perfectly willing to overlook his wedding ring for a taste of the luxury lifestyle he flaunted. I had my suspicions, of course. Forensic accountants notice everything. I saw the unexplained charges on the corporate accounts, the lavish hotel suites booked under subsidiary names, and the sudden shift in his schedule. But catching a financial discrepancy is one thing. Walking in on the reality of it is something entirely different. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was supposed to be in Chicago for a financial crimes seminar, but my flight was canceled due to a massive storm front moving across the Midwest. I caught an earlier flight back to Atlanta, arriving at our estate just past midnight. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming heavily against the slate roof of the mansion I had spent 2 years designing. I unlocked the front door expecting the quiet comfort of my home. Instead, I heard music echoing from the second floor and the unmistakable sound of a woman laughing. I walked up the sweeping grand staircase, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The door to the master suite was wide open, and there they were. Marcus and Jasmine tangled together in the custom California king bed I had specially ordered from Italy. They were drinking vintage champagne from the crystal glasses I received as a wedding gift. Most wives would have screamed. Some would have cried or thrown things. I just stood in the doorway, the cold reality washing over me like ice water. I looked at the man I had saved from financial ruin, the man I had built into a titan, and waited for the panic to set in on his face. I waited for the apologies, the scrambling, the desperate excuses. But Marcus did not scramble. He did not apologize. He simply sat up, took a slow sip of his champagne, and looked at me with absolute chilling indifference. "You are home early," he said, his voice completely devoid of guilt. Jasmine pulled the silk sheets up to her chest, not looking ashamed at all, but rather annoyed that I had interrupted them. I demanded that he get her out of my house immediately. I told him we were done, that I was filing for divorce in the morning, and that he needed to pack his bags. That is when Marcus let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Your house," he sneered, stepping out of bed and pulling on his robe. "Look at the deed, Nia. Look at the corporate structure you helped me build. This property belongs to Davenport Holdings. I am the CEO. You are just an employee who is no longer required." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of his words, Marcus picked up his phone. He did not call a taxi for his mistress. He opened his banking app. Right in front of me, he systematically locked every single joint credit card we shared. He transferred the entire balance of our checking accounts into a private offshore trust he had apparently set up behind my back. "You want a divorce?" he said, his eyes narrowed with malice. "Fine. But you are leaving tonight. And you are leaving exactly the way I found you, with nothing." I refused to move. I told him he was insane if he thought he could legally kick his wife out of their marital home. But Marcus did not care about the law in that moment. He only cared about power. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising and tight, and physically dragged me out of the master suite. He shoved me down the hallway, ignoring my demands to let me go. Jasmine followed close behind, laughing softly as she watched the woman who built this empire get discarded like trash. Marcus grabbed the small suitcase I had just brought back from the airport. He opened the massive mahogany front door and shoved me out into the freezing torrential rain. He threw my suitcase out after me, the impact busting the zipper and spilling my clothes onto the wet driveway. "Welcome to the real world, Nia," he shouted over the roar of the thunder. "Try not to drown." The heavy door slammed shut, the deadbolt clicking into place with a sickening finality. I stood there shivering in the pouring rain, my clothes instantly soaked through to my skin. I reached for my phone with trembling, freezing fingers and tried to book a room at a nearby hotel. The transaction was declined. I tried another card. Declined. Marcus had completely financially paralyzed me in a matter of minutes. I knelt on the wet concrete, gathering my soaked belongings, the water mixing with the hot tears of betrayal streaming down my face. I had given this man my prime years. I had shielded him from ruin, polished his rough edges, and handed him the keys to the kingdom. And he had rewarded my loyalty by replacing me with an assistant and throwing me onto the street like a stray dog. But as the initial shock faded, the tears stopped. A deep, cold fury began to burn perfectly clear in my chest. Marcus thought he had won because he held the keys to the mansion and the passwords to the bank accounts. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had forgotten who actually designed his entire financial labyrinth. He had forgotten that I knew where every single skeleton was buried because I was the one who dug the graves. I looked up at the glowing windows of the master suite, the rain stinging my face, and made a silent vow. I was not just going to divorce Marcus Davenport. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece until there was absolutely nothing left. I walked away from Tara's pristine porch and back into the relentless freezing rain, my broken suitcase dragging heavily behind me. The storm was howling, but the cold radiating from my chest was far worse. I managed to hail a ride using a prepaid emergency debit card I always kept tucked inside the lining of my work bag, a paranoid habit from my years investigating financial ruin that ironically just saved my life. I directed the driver to the affluent Buckhead neighborhood, straight to the sprawling gated estate of Marcus's older sister, Tara. For 8 years, Tara had played the role of the sophisticated, highly educated matriarch of the Davenport family. She was heavily involved in the local Jack and Jill chapters, hosted lavish charity galas, and always projected an image of flawless moral superiority. I naively believed that as a woman, and as someone who prided herself on family values, she would be absolutely horrified by her brother's actions. I thought she would throw open her heavy oak doors, hand me a warm blanket, and immediately pick up the phone to demand Marcus explain his unhinged, cruel behavior. My legs felt unsteady, practically buckling beneath me, as I dragged my ruined suitcase up her pristine, meticulously landscaped driveway. Every step felt like walking on a turbulent ship deck. I reached the grand entryway and pressed the glowing doorbell, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I waited shivering under the massive stone portico. When the heavy mahogany door finally swung open, the blast of warm, vanilla-scented air from the house felt like heaven. But Tara did not step aside to let me in. She stood on the elevated threshold looking down at me. I was forced to look up at her, feeling smaller and more insignificant than I had ever felt in my entire life. She was wearing a luxurious emerald silk robe, her hair wrapped perfectly, holding a steaming mug of expensive coffee. Her eyes swept over my drenched hair, my ruined designer coat, and the broken suitcase at my feet. There was no gasp of concern. There was no rush of sisterly panic. Her perfectly arched eyebrows merely drew together in a look of profound irritation. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray animal tracking mud onto a pristine porch. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour?" "Nia," she asked, her voice flat and completely devoid of warmth. "You are dripping water all over the welcome mat." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop my violent shivering. "Marcus locked me out," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. "I caught him in our bed with Jasmine. He froze all our joint accounts. He canceled my credit cards and physically pushed me out into the storm. Tara, he literally threw me out on the street. I need your help. I need you to talk some sense into him." Tara took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. She did not flinch when I mentioned Jasmine's name. She did not gasp in shock. She just let out a long, heavy sigh and reluctantly stepped back, allowing me to enter the grand foyer. But she held up her hand, stopping me before I could step onto the imported hardwood floors of the main living area. Stay right there on the marble, she instructed coldly. I just had the carpets professionally cleaned. I stood frozen in the entryway, water pooling around my ruined shoes. You are not surprised, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You already knew about Jasmine. Tara offered a tight, condescending smile. Of course I knew about Jasmine. She was just at my country club luncheon last weekend. She has wonderful taste in floral arrangements, actually. Much more vibrant than yours. My breath caught in my throat. My own sister-in-law, a woman I had spent countless holidays with, a woman whose massive charity tax write-offs I had personally audited and organized to save her from massive IRS penalties, had been socializing with my husband's mistress. How could you? I whispered, staring up at her arrogant face. I am his wife. I built his company. I gave him the foundation to buy this entire lifestyle you all enjoy. Tara let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Oh, Nia, please stop with the martyr narrative. It is incredibly exhausting. You did not build Marcus. Marcus is a visionary. You were just the hired help who happened to wear a wedding ring. You crunched numbers. You filed paperwork. Any competent accountant could have done what you did. Marcus is the one with the charm, the connections, and the power. She took another step closer, looking down her nose at me with a gaze so full of aristocratic disdain it burned. You have to understand how the real world works for men like my brother. Marcus is building an empire. He is a titan in this city, and a titan requires certain things that you simply cannot provide. I knew exactly where she was going, and the cruelty of it made my vision blur. An empire needs an heir, Tara said, her voice dropping into a vicious, lethal whisper. 8 years, Nia. 8 years of marriage, and you have failed to give the Davenport family a single child. You cannot expect a king to sit on an empty throne without a legacy to leave behind. If his wife is physically incapable of providing that legacy, he has every right to go out and find a replacement who can. Jasmine is young. She is healthy. She is ready to give him the family he deserves. Her words sliced through my chest with surgical precision. My struggles with fertility were the deepest, most private pain of my life. I had undergone multiple grueling rounds of treatments, enduring countless injections and heartbreaking losses, all while balancing the insane workload required to keep Marcus's company afloat. Tara knew all of this. She knew the tears I had cried behind closed doors. And now she was using my deepest trauma as a weapon to justify her brother's despicable infidelity. You are blaming me for his cheating because I could not get pregnant, I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of devastation and rising rage. You are justifying him throwing his wife into a freezing storm because I could not give you a nephew. I am not justifying anything, Tara replied smoothly, adjusting the silk tie of her robe. I am simply stating the facts of life for people in our position. You served your purpose during the startup phase. You kept the books clean. But Marcus has outgrown you. You do not fit the image of a Davenport matriarch. Jasmine does. She understands how to play the game. She understands her role. You are always too busy acting like a business partner instead of a wife. The sheer audacity of her delusion was staggering. The Davenports genuinely believed their own fabricated mythology. They believed they were royalty, completely ignoring the fact that their entire lavish existence was funded by the financial safety nets I had meticulously constructed. They thought my money, my sweat, and my brilliance were simply their birthright. You need to accept reality? Tara continued, her tone shifting to mock pity. Accept the divorce gracefully. Do not make a scene. Do not embarrass us in the community. If you walk away quietly, maybe Marcus will write you a nice little severance check. But if you try to fight him, he will crush you. We will crush you. Now please leave. You are making a puddle on my floor and my husband is trying to sleep. I looked at this woman, truly seeing the ugly, rotten core hiding beneath the expensive silk and the charity board titles. I was not looking at family. I was looking at parasites. Parasites who had fed on my hard work for nearly a decade and were now trying to discard the host. I did not cry anymore. The shock and the heartbreak evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I nodded slowly, my eyes locking onto hers with a chilling intensity that made her signature smile falter for just a fraction of a second. I turned around, gripped the handle of my broken suitcase, and walked back out into the freezing rain. Tara thought she was dismissing a defeated barren wife. She had no idea she had just declared war on the most dangerous financial weapon her family had ever allowed inside their vault. If they wanted an empire, I was going to gladly show them exactly how quickly empires can fall when the architect decides to pull out the cornerstone. Before I could even reach the heavy wrought iron gates at the end of the sprawling driveway, a sharp voice cut through the howling wind and pounding rain, freezing me in my tracks. "Leaving so soon, Nia? You haven't even said hello." I stopped and turned around, standing under the expansive vaulted shelter of the carriage house, perfectly dry and comfortably illuminated by the soft amber glow of the outdoor sconces, was Kyle, Tara's husband. He was leaning casually against a massive stone pillar, holding a heavy crystal tumbler of expensive amber scotch. He took a slow, deliberate sip, watching me struggle in the storm like a predator observing a wounded, drowning bird. Kyle held the title of Chief Financial Officer at Davenport Commercial Real Estate, but anyone who actually understood the inner workings of the company knew that title was an absolute joke. Kyle was born into generational old money wealth. He was a white man who had married into a prominent black family, heavily leveraging Tara's social connections and Marcus's minority-owned business status to secure massive federal contracts and lucrative municipal tax incentives. He paraded around Atlanta acting like a financial genius, but in reality, he was nothing more than a puppet CFO. He barely understood the basic principles of corporate tax law. I was the one who actually balanced his ledgers. I was the one who quietly fixed his catastrophic accounting errors before the board could see them. I did his job for him while he collected a seven-figure salary and all the prestige that came with it. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my ruined clothes, my shivering frame, and the broken suitcase resting in the puddles at my feet. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Look at the great Nia Davenport," he sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. "Reduced to a drowned rat in my driveway. I have to admit, seeing you finally put in your place is incredibly satisfying." I tightened my grip on the handle of my luggage, refusing to let him see me shiver. The icy downpour plastered my hair to my face, my expensive wool coat now a heavy, sodden weight dragging me down. Meanwhile, Kyle stood perfectly insulated, the ambient heat from the carriage house radiating outward, keeping him completely untouched by the harsh reality of the storm. "Did you and Marcus plan this together, Kyle?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Did you help him lock me out of my own life?" Kyle let out a dark, booming laugh that echoed in the cavernous space. He stepped slightly out of the shadows, making sure I could see the absolute contempt burning in his eyes. "Plan this together, Nia. We've been planning your exit strategy for 6 months. You really thought you were untouchable just because you spent a few years cleaning up some spreadsheets? You actually believed you were an equal partner in this empire." He shook his head, looking at me as if I were a delusional, petulant child. "You are just a lowly accountant, a glorified calculator from a working-class neighborhood who got lucky enough to marry a titan. You were a useful tool during the startup phase, but tools get replaced when they get dull." The sheer arrogance radiating from him was suffocating. He stood there wrapped in cashmere and unearned privilege, casually admitting to a coordinated conspiracy to destroy my life. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted to strip away every ounce of my dignity to validate his own inflated sense of superiority. "You know, Nia, I always told Marcus you were too rigid for a man of his stature." Kyle continued, swirling the ice in his glass. "You lack the grace required for this echelon of society. Jasmine, on the other hand, she knows how to cater to a king. She knows her place. You never learned yours." "I didn't just balance your ledgers, Kyle," I said, stepping closer to the shelter, staring him dead in the eye. "I structured the very tax shelters that keep the IRS from tearing this family apart. I hid your incompetent offshore transfers so the SEC wouldn't launch an investigation into your frat boy accounting methods. You are a fraud." His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, venomous glare. I had struck a nerve. Kyle hated nothing more than being reminded of his own glaring incompetence. He took a step forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little bean counter," he hissed. "You have absolutely nothing. You have no money. You have no power. You have no leverage. Marcus and I hold every single card in this deck. We control the board. We control the stakeholders. We control the bank accounts. We are the Davenport Empire. You are just a signature on a marriage certificate that is about to be annulled." He took another sip of his whiskey, regaining his smug, untouchable composure. He wanted to make sure I understood the absolute hopelessness of my situation. He wanted to break me psychologically before I even set foot inside a courtroom. "You are a number cruncher, Nia, so crunch the numbers," he mocked. "Your bank balance is zero. Your credit limit is zero. The retainer for a divorce attorney of our caliber is $100,000 just to walk through the door. You are mathematically eliminated from this fight before the bell even rings. What do you think is going to happen next? Do you really think you can fight us with what resources?" He leaned against the pillar again, looking incredibly pleased with his own monologue. "We will drag you through years of brutal litigation. We have a team of ruthless corporate attorneys on retainer who specialize in burying people like you in paperwork until you are drowning in legal fees. We will bleed you dry until you cannot even afford to rent a filthy studio apartment on the wrong side of town. We will take the cars, the investments, the properties. We will make sure you walk away with nothing but the wet clothes on your back." Kyle tilted his head, his eyes glinting with malice. "And if you try to make a scene, if you try to go to the press or cause a scandal in the community, we will completely destroy your professional reputation. Who do you think the elite circles of Atlanta are going to believe? Two highly respected, wealthy male executives or a bitter, hysterical barren ex-wife?" The cruelty of his words was meant to paralyze me with fear. He was leveraging every ounce of his societal privilege, his wealth, and his gender to intimidate me into absolute submission. He fully expected me to fall to my knees, beg for mercy, and accept whatever pathetic settlement they decided to throw at me like a scrap of meat. But as I stood there in the pouring rain looking up at this arrogant, mediocre man who had coasted through life on unearned privilege and stolen credit, I did not feel fear. I felt an exhilarating, razor-sharp clarity. Kyle was so blinded by his own hubris that he had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought my power came from Marcus's bank accounts. He thought my value was tied to the designer clothes I wore or the mansion I lived in. He genuinely believed that because I operated quietly in the background, I was weak. He had completely forgotten that I was a forensic accountant. My entire existence was dedicated to finding the things that arrogant men tried to hide. I did not need their money to fight them. I just needed their data. And I already had it. "Are you done, Kyle?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly steady, betraying absolutely zero emotion. He looked slightly taken aback by my lack of hysterics, but quickly recovered his sneer. "Just remember your place, Nia. Sign the papers when they arrive. Walk away quietly, and maybe Marcus will be generous enough to cover your first month's rent in a trailer park." "I will see you in court, Kyle," I said softly, the words carrying a promise of absolute destruction that he was too stupid to recognize. I turned my back on him and walked toward the heavy iron gates. I heard him laugh behind me, a loud, obnoxious sound of pure triumph. Let him laugh. Let him drink his expensive scotch and toast to his brilliant conspiracy. He had just confirmed everything I needed to know. They were arrogant, they were sloppy, and they were completely unaware that the woman they just threw out into the storm was already drafting their federal prison sentences. I spent the next 48 hours in a cheap windowless room at an extended stay motel on the outskirts of the city. The contrast between the damp, musty carpet beneath my feet and the imported Italian marble I had been standing on just 2 days prior was jarring. But I did not have time to mourn my lost luxury. I needed a staging ground. I bought a basic laptop with the remaining funds on my emergency card, set up a secure virtual private network, and waited for Marcus to make his next move. I did not have to wait long. On Thursday morning, a heavy, aggressive knock rattled the flimsy motel door. I opened it to find a process server wearing a cheap suit and a smug expression. He shoved a thick, oversized manila envelope into my chest, told me I had been served, and walked away without another word. Marcus had tracked me down using the private investigator he kept on retainer for his corporate rivals. He wanted to make sure I felt hunted. He wanted to prove that no matter where I tried to hide, his reach was absolute. I carried the heavy envelope to the small laminate desk in the corner of the room, broke the seal, and dumped the contents onto the table. It was a formal petition for dissolution of marriage, drafted by one of the most ruthless and expensive family law firms in Atlanta. Attached to the petition was a comprehensive statement of assets and liabilities, a legally binding financial disclosure detailing the entire net worth of the Davenport marital estate. I poured myself a cup of cheap motel coffee, sat down, and began to read. Within the first 3 pages, I felt a sharp, involuntary bark of laughter escape my throat. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of what I was looking at was breathtaking. Marcus and Kyle had not just doctored the financial records, they had completely rewritten reality. According to the legally binding document in my hands, the Davenport commercial real estate empire, a company I knew for a fact, had just cleared a $50 million valuation, was suddenly hemorrhaging money. The balance sheets were a work of dark fiction. They had magically erased tens of millions of dollars in liquid capital. They had fabricated a sudden catastrophic market downturn that supposedly left all our prime commercial properties severely underwater. The document listed massive newly created liabilities, including phantom loans from mysterious private equity firms and bloated operational debts that had never existed when I was managing the books. By the time I reached the final summary page, Marcus and Kyle had managed to shrink our entire marital estate down to a pathetic, insulting $50,000. Attached to this fairy tale was a formal settlement offer from Marcus's legal team. The terms were laid out with chilling, calculated cruelty. Marcus was graciously offering to let me walk away with $25,000, exactly half of the fabricated liquid assets. In exchange, I had to sign a total non-disclosure agreement, waive all rights to future alimony, and completely sever my ties to Davenport Holdings. But it was the next paragraph that revealed the true depth of their malice. If I refused to sign the quick settlement, if I dared to contest the divorce, or demand a forensic audit of the company, Marcus would ensure the court recognized the fabricated corporate debt as a joint marital liability. The document explicitly threatened that I would be held legally and financially responsible for half of a newly minted $12 million deficit. They were trying to bury me alive. They were using the legal system as a weapon of mass intimidation. Marcus knew that the average person, terrified and exhausted, would look at the threat of a $6 million debt and instantly crumble. He expected me to panic, sign the papers in tears, and take the $25,000 bribe just to escape the crushing weight of those phantom liabilities. He wanted me to believe that my only option for survival was total surrender. But as I sat there tracing the columns of fabricated numbers, I did not feel fear. I felt profound professional disgust. The forgery was insulting to my intelligence. I could see Kyle's sloppy, incompetent fingerprints all over the fake ledgers. He had used generic expense categories to hide massive cash withdrawals. He had manipulated depreciation schedules using amateurish tax loopholes that I had explicitly warned him against years ago. They had rushed the forgery, assuming I would be too emotionally broken by the infidelity to actually read the fine print. They thought I was just a heartbroken wife. They forgot I was the architect who designed the very vault they were currently trying to rob. They had handed a master forensic accountant a signed, legally binding document full of blatant, easily provable perjury. They had just committed federal fraud on paper, submitted it to a court of law, and tied it directly to Marcus's signature. I pushed the fraudulent settlement offer across the cheap desk and opened my new laptop. Marcus wanted to play a game of financial intimidation. He wanted to use numbers to break my spirit. But numbers were my weapon, my language, and my domain. I was not going to sign his pathetic settlement, and I was certainly not going to walk away quietly. I was going to use his own sloppy forgery as the rope to hang him. As I booted up the cheap laptop to begin dismantling Marcus and Kyle's fraudulent financial disclosures, my phone buzzed on the laminate desk. It was a notification from a burner social media account I used to monitor corporate competitors. I clicked the alert and was immediately dragged into a masterclass in psychological warfare. Jasmine Cole was not content with merely stealing my husband and sleeping in my bed. She wanted to publicly steal my entire identity, and she was broadcasting the theft live to the entire Atlanta elite. Her social media feed had transformed overnight. The 28-year-old assistant who used to post pictures of happy hours and cramped apartment mirrors was now aggressively flaunting a lifestyle she had not earned. The first video on her page made the blood roar in my ears. It was a grand house tour. Jasmine was walking through the grand foyer of the Buckhead mansion, her high heels clicking against the very same imported marble I had painstakingly selected and paid for. She spun around in the entryway, a glass of my vintage champagne in her hand, giggling for the camera. The caption read, "Out with the old in with the upgrade. Boss wife energy." But the sheer disrespect did not stop at the real estate. As I scrolled through her recent uploads, a fresh wave of visceral disgust washed over me. In a photo posted just an hour prior, Jasmine was posing on the sweeping grand staircase. She was wearing my clothes. It was not just a generic outfit. It was a bespoke, tailored emerald green gown I had commissioned for a charity gala the previous winter. She had raided my master closet. She was parading around in garments bought with my hard-earned money, garments Marcus had physically barred me from packing when he threw me out into the storm. She wore my diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist and draped my custom trench coat over her shoulders. She was literally wearing my skin, parading herself as the new reigning queen of the Davenport Empire. The comments beneath the photo were a sickening display of high society hypocrisy. Several of Marcus's business associates left fire emojis. But the comment that truly made my stomach churn came from Tara. My sister-in-law had commented, "So gorgeous, darling. Green is definitely your color. Welcome to the family." Tara was publicly endorsing the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, cementing the family's coordinated effort to replace me without a single ounce of shame. Then came the ultimate, unforgivable insult. Jasmine posted a short video clip from the driver's seat of a car. The camera panned slowly across the steering wheel, showing off the iconic crest, before tilting up to reveal the panoramic sunroof and the custom cream leather interior. It was a Porsche Panamera. My Porsche Panamera. Marcus had kept the keys when he locked me out, but the cruelest part of this display was the financial reality hidden behind the dashboard. Marcus had frozen my access to our joint funds, leaving me destitute in a cheap motel, but my name was still the primary signature on that luxury auto loan. I was legally and financially responsible for the exorbitant monthly payments on a high-performance vehicle that my husband's mistress was currently using to joyride through the streets of Atlanta. Jasmine was actively destroying the mileage and flaunting the luxury, fully aware that the crushing debt was resting squarely on my shoulders. Her caption on the Porsche video was a direct, unmistakable taunt aimed right at my throat. It read, "When your man upgrades your entire life, secure the bag, ladies." She wanted me to see it. She knew I was locked out, shivering and broke. She wanted to break me psychologically. She wanted me to sit in my squalid motel room, look at her wearing my diamonds and driving my car, and feel completely, utterly powerless. Marcus and Kyle were trying to crush me with fabricated legal debt, and Jasmine was deployed to crush my spirit with public humiliation. It was a coordinated three-pronged attack designed to force me into a rapid, unconditional surrender. Any normal woman would have shattered. I should have thrown my phone against the motel wall. I should have dissolved into a puddle of hysterical tears broken by the sheer overwhelming weight of the disrespect. But I did not cry. I stared at the screen, my heart beating in a slow, icy rhythm. Jasmine Cole was arrogant, vain, and remarkably stupid. She thought she was waging a war of social dominance, entirely blind to the fact that she was currently providing a master forensic accountant with a meticulously documented, time-stamped, and geolocated catalog of hidden marital assets, while Marcus was submitting sworn legal affidavits to the family court claiming he was teetering on the edge of financial ruin, claiming his estate was only worth $50,000. His new girlfriend was broadcasting irrefutable proof of massive undeclared wealth. She was showing off expensive jewelry, luxury vehicles, and lavish spending that directly contradicted every single line of Kyle's fabricated balance sheets. I took a slow, deep breath, opened a secure encrypted folder on my laptop, and began taking high-resolution screenshots of every single post, every video, every comment, and every caption. I archived the metadata. I mapped the timelines. Jasmine thought she was humiliating me for the entertainment of the Atlanta social scene. She had no idea she was acting as my personal lead investigator. With every smug selfie and every boastful video, she was cheerfully handing me the exact ammunition I needed to trigger a federal investigation. The psychological warfare did not break me. It weaponized me. I saved the final video of her driving my Porsche, closed the folder, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to stop looking at the surface and start digging into the deep, dark digital underground of Davenport commercial real estate. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the dark, cramped motel room, casting a cold, harsh blue light across my face. I stared at the blank monitor, the ambient noise of the highway outside fading into absolute silence. I did not shed a single tear. The time for mourning a dead marriage had officially expired. In its place was a sharp clinical focus. As I rested my fingers on the keyboard, Kyle's arrogant, aristocratic voice echoed in the back of my mind. He had called me a lowly accountant. He had called me a glorified calculator. He had said it with such absolute certainty, standing in his sheltered driveway, while I stood freezing in the rain. He genuinely believed that reducing my profession to a derogatory insult somehow stripped me of my power. He failed to realize that being a glorified calculator meant I possessed the exact key required to dismantle his entire universe. I opened the digital file containing the statement of assets and liabilities that Marcus had served me earlier that morning. I did not just read the document. I dissected it with the precision of a seasoned surgeon. Forensic accounting is not simply about adding and subtracting numbers. It is the complex art of financial psychology. It is understanding exactly how arrogant men lie. When people attempt to hide massive amounts of wealth, they rarely create entirely new systems from scratch. They are inherently lazy. They manipulate existing frameworks, relying on layers of complexity and sheer volume to exhaust anyone who tries to look too closely. But I was the one who built Davenport Commercial Real Estate's original financial architecture. I knew the load-bearing walls. I knew where the foundation was solid, and more importantly, I knew exactly where Kyle would try to knock holes in it to stash his stolen cash. I started with the most glaring discrepancy on the first page, the phantom $12 million operational debt that Marcus claimed was currently threatening to bankrupt the company. To a family court judge or a standard divorce attorney, the attached balance sheets might look like a tragic, legitimate victim of a sudden market downturn. But to me, they read like a toddler's attempt at forging a masterpiece. Kyle had been incredibly, almost offensively sloppy. I pulled up the commercial property tax records from the state database, cross-referencing them against the depreciation schedules listed in Marcus's sworn affidavit. The numbers immediately clashed with violent obviousness. Kyle had attempted to accelerate the depreciation on 3 of our most lucrative commercial properties in downtown Atlanta, claiming massive sudden structural devaluations. But I had personally overseen the environmental and structural audits for those exact buildings just 6 months ago. They were pristine Class A commercial spaces fully leased to blue-chip corporate tenants on 10-year ironclad contracts. You cannot claim a sudden catastrophic loss of rental income when your primary tenants are multinational banks paying their leases a full year in advance. I saw exactly what he had done. Kyle had fabricated phantom maintenance expenses funneling millions of dollars into shell vendor accounts under the guise of emergency renovations that never actually occurred. I cracked my knuckles, the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard accelerating into a rapid, relentless tempo. If Kyle was creating dummy vendors to siphon liquid capital out of the primary holding company, those vendors needed bank accounts, and those bank accounts needed routing numbers. I accessed a specialized financial tracing software I utilized for my high-level corporate audits. I bypassed the superficial layers of the Davenport holding structure and dove straight into the subsidiary ledgers. It was a digital labyrinth designed to confuse and exhaust, but I navigated it with blindfolded familiarity. I followed the trail of the fabricated renovation costs. The money was being transferred from Davenport's primary operational accounts in Atlanta, washed through a series of domestic limited liability companies registered in Delaware, and then quietly funneled outward. I noticed a distinct rhythmic pattern to the transfers. Every single transaction was carefully kept just under the federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering automated banking alerts. It was a classic textbook structuring maneuver commonly known in financial crime circles as smurfing. Kyle was systematically siphoning the company's massive profits, masking them as legitimate business expenses, and intentionally draining the marital estate so Marcus could present a destitute financial profile to the divorce court. I opened a second monitor window, bringing up the archive of Jasmine's social media posts I had captured earlier. I began cross-referencing the dates of her most lavish purchases with the dates of Kyle's largest fraudulent corporate withdrawals. The synchronization was breathtaking. 3 days before Jasmine posted a video showing off a brand new diamond tennis bracelet, Kyle had logged a $40,000 expense for supposed HVAC repairs at a property that did not even have central air conditioning. 2 weeks before Jasmine moved into the Buckhead mansion, Kyle had transferred $250,000 under the category of legal retainers for future acquisitions. They were using the company's operating capital as a personal slush fund, bleeding the marital assets dry to fund Marcus's infidelity, while simultaneously fabricating a debt narrative to crush me in court. But where was the rest of the money actually going? Arrogant men like Marcus and Kyle do not just burn cash on luxury cars and jewelry. They hoard it. They hoard it in places they believe are untouchable by ex-wives, local judges, and standard civil subpoenas. I spent the next 6 hours locked in a state of absolute unbreakable concentration. I did not eat. I did not sleep. The cold blue light of the screen was my only connection to the outside world. I tracked a specific recurring transfer pattern buried deep within the payroll logs. Every month on the 15th, exactly $400,000 evaporated from the Davenport logistics budget. Kyle had labeled it as a consulting retainer for an external international acquisitions firm. I ran a deep background search on the consulting firm's registered tax identification number. The firm did not exist. It was a ghost entity, a hollow corporate shell registered to a post office box in a strip mall in Nevada. I matched the ghost entity's limited public data with global banking registries. My eyes narrowed as the digital breadcrumbs began to form a clear, undeniable path. The money was not staying in Nevada. The domestic accounts were just a brief holding pen. Within 24 hours of every deposit, the funds were wired internationally. I followed the routing numbers across the digital ocean, my pulse quickening with every new layer of encryption I bypassed. Kyle thought his generational wealth and Marcus's smooth-talking charm made them completely invisible to consequences. They believed their tailored suits and country club memberships elevated them above the law. But numbers do not care about your zip code. Numbers do not care about your gender, your status, or your arrogance. Numbers leave a permanent, indelible stain. And I was reading their stains loud and clear. They were moving tens of millions of dollars out of the country, aggressively hiding the marital assets, and preparing to leave me with a mountain of fabricated, crushing debt. They wanted a war of attrition, believing my lack of funds would force my total surrender. But they had just handed me the exact unfiltered map of their entire illicit empire. I was no longer just fighting a bitter divorce. I was actively unraveling a massive multi-million-dollar corporate conspiracy. I did not hesitate. The breadcrumbs leading overseas were begging to be followed, but to see the complete picture, I needed access to the undisputed source of truth. I needed to get inside Kyle's master server. Kyle had undoubtedly locked my official administrative credentials the moment Marcus threw me out. But what the arrogant chief financial officer did not know was that I had never trusted his digital hygiene. Years ago, when I first restructured the firm's accounting software to comply with federal regulations, I embedded a silent secondary access protocol. It was a fail-safe designed to let me fix his catastrophic errors quietly before the quarterly audits. Tonight, that fail-safe became my battering ram. I ran the executable file from my motel room desk. A black command prompt illuminated my face. Within 40 seconds, I bypassed the superficial firewalls Kyle had likely paid some overpriced tech firm to install. I was in. The entire digital nervous system of Davenport commercial real estate lay completely exposed before me. I bypassed the standard operational folders and drilled straight down into the restricted executive directories. The files were heavily encrypted, labeled with mundane titles like vendor supplies and archived payroll. But a forensic accountant knows that the most boring file names often hide the most devastating secrets. I ran a decryption script and ripped the vault wide open. The screen flooded with spreadsheets, offshore wire receipts, and corporate registration documents. My eyes scanned the data, processing the numbers at a blistering pace. The Nevada ghost entities I had tracked earlier were just the tip of the spear. The money was flowing in a massive, uninterrupted river straight to the Cayman Islands. Marcus and Kyle had established a sophisticated network of shell companies nestled comfortably in Grand Cayman, operating under a veil of total corporate anonymity. But as I cross-referenced the incoming revenue streams against the offshore deposits, a cold chill crept down my spine. The math was entirely wrong, but not in the way I initially expected. They were not just siphoning corporate profits to hide them from the divorce courts. There was far too much cash moving through these accounts. Millions upon millions of dollars were appearing out of thin air, completely untethered to any legitimate commercial property we owned. I isolated a single property in downtown Atlanta, a massive luxury retail space that Marcus had purchased 18 months ago. The official ledgers claimed the building was completely vacant, undergoing extensive multi-million-dollar renovations. But the hidden offshore ledgers told a terrifyingly different story. The property was allegedly generating staggering amounts of rental income from anonymous overseas commercial tenants. Rents were being paid entirely in cash funneled through dummy corporations mixed with the firm's legitimate revenue, and then washed clean through the Cayman accounts. I stopped typing. The room around me felt suddenly devoid of oxygen. Marcus and Kyle were not simply arrogant businessmen cheating on their taxes and hiding marital assets. Davenport commercial real estate was a front. They were actively running a massive money laundering syndicate for organized crime. They were taking dirty illicit cash from illegal operations, washing it through inflated real estate acquisitions and phantom commercial leases, and pumping it back into the global banking system as clean, untraceable corporate profit. It was a staggering level of criminality. Kyle was using his old money connections to ensure the federal banking regulators looked the other way, relying on his family name as a shield of legitimacy. Marcus was using his status as a charismatic, highly visible real estate titan to acquire the properties needed to wash the cash. They were playing a dangerous high-stakes game with federal law, fueled entirely by their own insatiable greed and bottomless arrogance. But every money laundering operation requires a fall guy, a designated target who takes the absolute brunt of the legal fallout when the federal authorities eventually come kicking down the doors. Marcus and Kyle were greedy, but they were also incredibly cowardly. They would never put their own names on the most toxic offshore documents. They needed a proxy. I opened the registration files for the Cayman shell companies. I pulled up the articles of incorporation, the wire transfer authorizations, and the deeds for the luxury properties purchased with the laundered funds. I scrolled down to the signature lines, searching for the designated registered agent. I let out a sharp, breathless laugh that echoed loudly in the empty motel room. It was almost too perfect. It was a masterclass in poetic justice. Staring back at me, scrawled across dozens of federal and international financial documents, was the signature of Jasmine Cole. My husband had not just upgraded his life with a younger, more compliant assistant. He had found the perfect gullible scapegoat. Jasmine was so blinded by the designer clothes, the luxury cars, and the illusion of power that she had eagerly signed every single piece of paper Marcus slid across her desk. She thought she was signing executive non-disclosure agreements and elite corporate partnerships. She believed she was cementing her status as the new queen of the Davenport Empire. She had absolutely no idea that Marcus had legally structured her as the sole owner and primary beneficiary of an international money laundering ring. Every single piece of dirty money flowing through the Caymans was tied directly to her social security number. The Porsche she was currently driving through Buckhead, the very same car she used to publicly humiliate me on social media, was registered to one of the most toxic shell companies in the entire network. If the Internal Revenue Service or the Federal Bureau of Investigation ever breached those servers, Marcus and Kyle would claim absolute ignorance. They would point the finger directly at the ambitious assistant who had inexplicably taken over the offshore accounts. Jasmine thought she had won the ultimate prize. She was currently sleeping in my bed, drinking my champagne and wearing my diamonds, utterly oblivious to the fact that she was wearing a federal bullseye directly on her back. Marcus had not crowned a new queen. He had groomed a sacrificial lamb. And as I sat in the dark compiling the evidence bite by bite, downloading every single fraudulent signature and illegal wire transfer onto a secure external drive, I realized I did not even need to destroy her. I just needed to hand the documentation to the federal government and watch her own arrogance build her prison cell. The progress bar on my secure data transfer hit 100% with a soft chime. I safely ejected the encrypted drive and slipped it into the lining of my jacket. Right at that exact moment, the cheap prepaid cell phone I had purchased earlier that afternoon began to violently vibrate against the laminate desk. I had texted my new number to Marcus's attorney, framing it as my only means of communication after Marcus locked my primary accounts. I stared at the glowing screen. The caller ID was blocked, but I knew exactly which arrogant titan was on the other end of the line. I closed my laptop, took a deep centering breath, and answered the call. "Are you enjoying the squalor?" Nia, Marcus asked. His voice slithered through the speaker, thick with absolute unearned superiority. "I hope the motel sheets are comfortable. I hear they rarely wash them." I remained silent for a moment, letting him fill the space with his ego. "I received your ridiculous settlement offer," I said, keeping my voice intentionally tight. "It is not an offer, Nia. It is a directive," Marcus replied coldly. "You have been served the financial disclosures. You see the massive debt this company is currently carrying. I am being incredibly generous by offering you $50,000 right now to walk away. You should be thanking me on your knees for not making you shoulder half of those $12 million liabilities." "Marcus, those numbers are entirely fabricated," I said, feigning a tone of desperate exasperation. "You and Kyle manufactured that debt. You know I know that. I built your accounting structure. Do you really think a judge is going to look at those sloppy balance sheets and believe you are suddenly bankrupt?" Marcus let out a sharp, cruel laugh. It was the laugh of a man who firmly believed he owned the entire world. "A judge is going to look at whatever my high-priced legal team tells him to look at," Marcus sneered. "And if you try to contest those numbers, if you try to drag this out and demand a forensic audit, I will utterly destroy you before we even step foot inside a courtroom." He paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the air. "You think you can play games with me, Nia?" He continued, his voice dropping into a vicious, menacing register. "I am Marcus Davenport. I have half the city council on speed dial. I play golf with the media executives who run the biggest publications in Atlanta. If you do not sign those papers by Friday morning, I am going to unleash my public relations team on you. I will personally feed the blogs and the local news outlets the story of my tragic, unhinged ex-wife." "What are you talking about?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble slightly. "I will tell them you suffered a complete mental breakdown," Marcus threatened. "I will tell the world that your tragic inability to give me a child drove you completely insane. I will plant stories that you tried to embezzle money from my company out of sheer barren jealousy, and that I had to fire you and kick you out to protect my employees. I will drag your professional reputation through the mud. No accounting firm in the state of Georgia will ever hire you. You will be a social pariah in Atlanta. You will have absolutely nothing and everyone will laugh at your downfall." The sheer cruelty of his threat was staggering. He was weaponizing my most private, agonizing struggle with fertility to construct a fake narrative for the media. He wanted to frame me as a bitter, hysterical, infertile woman who lost her mind. It was a classic, deeply misogynistic playbook designed to strip me of all credibility. A few days ago, those words would have shattered my heart into a million irreparable pieces. But sitting in that dark motel room with his entire federal prison sentence secured on a flash drive in my pocket, his threats sounded like the desperate barking of a trapped dog. However, Marcus did not need to know that. Marcus needed to believe he had won. He needed to believe his psychological terrorism had completely broken my spirit. If I fought back now, if I showed strength, he and Kyle might panic and start moving the offshore money. I needed them completely relaxed. I needed them arrogant, sloppy, and totally off their guard. It was time to give my husband the exact performance he was demanding. I forced a sharp, ragged gasp into the phone receiver. I let my breathing become rapid and shallow, mimicking the onset of a severe panic attack. "Marcus, please," I cried out, letting my voice crack perfectly. "Please do not do this to me. You cannot say those things to the press. You know how hard I tried to give us a baby. You know what those treatments did to me. Please do not use that against me." My performance was flawless. I sounded utterly devastated, like a woman who had just realized she was completely outmatched and outgunned. "Then do exactly what you are told," Marcus commanded. He was reveling in my fabricated pain. I could practically hear his chest puffing out with pride. He loved hearing me beg. He loved feeling like a god holding my fate in his hands. "I do not have any money, Marcus," I sobbed, making sure to sniffle loudly into the microphone. "My suitcase is ruined. I am sleeping in a terrible motel. I just want this to be over. I cannot fight you and Kyle. You win. Okay, you win. Just please leave my reputation alone. I will take the $50,000. Just do not release those stories about me." The line went quiet for a moment. Marcus was soaking in his total victory. "That is what I thought," he said, his voice dripping with supreme satisfaction. "You finally understand your place. You are nothing without me, Nia. You always were." "I will sign the papers," I whispered, sounding thoroughly defeated. "I will sign whatever Kyle put in front of me. Just tell me where to be." "My lawyer is filing the expedited paperwork in the morning." Marcus instructed, his tone brisk and entirely businesslike now that he had conquered me. "We have an emergency mediation hearing scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning at the Fulton County Family Courthouse. You will show up. You will confirm to the judge that you accept the uncontested settlement of $50,000. You will waive your right to any further discovery and you will sign the non-disclosure agreement. If you say a single word out of line, the settlement drops to zero and the press release goes out. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I cried softly. "Friday at 10. I will be there. I just want my $50,000 so I can leave Atlanta." "Good girl," Marcus mocked. "Wear something cheap. It suits you." He ended the call without another word. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the cheap prepaid phone from my ear and placed it gently on the desk. I reached up and wiped a single fake tear from my cheek. I stared at the blank wall of the motel room for a long moment. Then the terrified, broken expression completely vanished from my face. My features settled back into a mask of pure, unadulterated ice. I let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated in the quiet room. Marcus Davenport was an incredibly predictable man. His ego was his absolute blind spot. He was so desperate to feel superior, so desperate to put me in my place, that he had swallowed my entire performance without a single ounce of suspicion. He genuinely believed he had successfully terrified me into accepting pennies while he sat on an offshore fortune. By securing my promise to sign the papers on Friday, he had given me exactly what I needed. I had secured a firm deadline, and more importantly, I had secured an audience. Marcus, Kyle, and Jasmine would all be walking into that courthouse feeling completely victorious. They would be walking in with their guard completely down, fully expecting me to bow my head and accept my humiliating defeat. They had no idea that I had just bought myself 48 undisturbed hours. I had 2 full days to hand deliver the Cayman Islands wire transfers, the fake lease agreements, and Jasmine's forged signatures to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I had 48 hours to trigger a massive federal response. Marcus wanted to threaten me with local blog posts and petty social media gossip. He wanted to wage a war using public relations. I was going to wage a war using the United States Department of Justice. I grabbed my coat, slipped the encrypted flash drive securely into my pocket, and walked out of the cheap motel room. The rain had finally stopped and the air was cold and clear. I hailed a ride and headed straight toward the federal building in downtown Atlanta. The trap was set, the bait was taken. Now all I had to do was show up to the courthouse on Friday morning and watch the steel jaws slam shut. The Richard B. Russell Federal Building loomed against the dark Atlanta skyline like a fortress of concrete and glass. Walking through those heavy revolving doors felt like crossing the threshold between my old life as an obedient wife and my new reality as the architect of my husband's destruction. I flashed my professional credentials at the security desk. As a certified forensic accountant who had previously consulted on municipal fraud cases, my license granted me immediate credibility. I asked the duty officer to contact Special Agent Donovan in the Financial Crimes Division. It was past 9 at night, but in the world of federal investigations, money never sleeps, and neither do the agents tracking it. Within 15 minutes, I was sitting inside a sterile, windowless briefing room on the 7th floor. Special Agent Donovan of the FBI walked in, holding a cup of black coffee, closely followed by Agent Mitchell from the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. They looked exhausted, clearly expecting a routine consultation. They had absolutely no idea that I was about to hand them the largest real estate money laundering bust in Georgia history on a silver platter. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I pulled the encrypted flash drive from my pocket, placed it on the steel table, and slid it toward them. I told them I was invoking my right to federal protection and officially filing IRS Form 211 as a whistleblower. I stated clearly that the drive contained irrefutable time-stamped proof of a massive international syndicate operating straight out of Buckhead. Agent Mitchell raised an eyebrow, opened his secure laptop, and plugged in the drive. As the decryption software ran, I began my presentation. I did not sound like a bitter ex-wife. I sounded like the apex predator of the accounting world. I directed their attention to the first folder. I walked them through the fabricated commercial debt that Kyle, the painfully incompetent chief financial officer of Davenport Holdings, had desperately tried to use against me. I showed them the crude depreciation schedules Kyle had manipulated. I pointed out the exact keystrokes where he had invented $12 million in phantom operational liabilities to hide his cash withdrawals. Kyle thought his generational wealth and white privilege shielded him from federal scrutiny. He thought he could just scribble fake numbers on a sworn legal affidavit and walk away. I showed the agents how Kyle was systematically smurfing millions of dollars in illicit cash, keeping every single deposit just a few dollars under the federal reporting threshold to avoid raising red flags. Agent Donovan sat up straight, his exhaustion completely vanishing. He stared at the screen as the sheer volume of the illegal structuring became apparent. But the real prize was in the second folder. I opened the offshore routing logs. I showed the federal agents exactly how Marcus was utilizing his status as a charismatic, highly respected black real estate titan to acquire prime commercial real estate in downtown Atlanta. Marcus was the perfect cover. He hosted charity galas, smiled for magazine covers, and shook hands with the mayor. Nobody suspected that his newly acquired luxury retail spaces were actually empty shells being used to wash dirty money for organized crime. I tracked the cash flow from the bogus domestic vendors straight to the Cayman Islands. Then I delivered the fatal blow. I pulled up the corporate registry documents for the offshore shell companies. I placed them side by side with the social media screenshots of Jasmine flaunting my stolen clothes and driving my Porsche. Agent Mitchell leaned closer to the screen, tracing the signature on the Cayman Island deeds. He looked up at me, pure astonishment written across his face. "My husband is an incredibly arrogant man," I explained, my voice echoing coldly in the briefing room. "But he is also a coward. He knew that if this federal house of cards ever collapsed, he needed a designated fall guy. So he appointed his new 28-year-old mistress as the sole registered agent and primary beneficiary of the entire offshore laundering network. Jasmine Cole signed every single piece of paper Marcus put in front of her because she was too blinded by the luxury lifestyle to hire her own attorney. She thinks she secured the bag. In reality, she just signed a full confession to federal racketeering and international tax evasion. The room was dead silent, save for the hum of the laptop fan. The two seasoned federal agents exchanged a look of profound professional respect. In their line of work, building a RICO case of this magnitude usually takes years of undercover operations wiretaps and tedious subpoenas. I had just handed them a fully executed bow-tied prosecution. The financial DNA was perfect. The digital footprints were undeniable. I had provided the motive, the method, and the smoking gun. Under the IRS whistleblower program, a person who provides actionable intelligence leading to the successful recovery of hidden taxable assets is legally entitled to 15 to 30% of the total recovered amount. I looked Agent Mitchell dead in the eye and confirmed my status. I was not just destroying my husband. I was legally claiming a massive percentage of the very wealth he tried to steal from me. Agent Donovan stood up and immediately reached for his phone. "This is a flight risk scenario," he stated briskly. "Davenport has offshore liquidity and access to private aviation. If he gets spooked, he is on a plane to a non-extradition country by midnight. We need to freeze everything immediately." I held up my hand, stopping him. "Marcus will not run," I assured the agent. "Marcus thinks he has already won. He firmly believes I am a terrified, broken woman who is going to show up at the Fulton County Family Court on Friday morning to sign away my entire life for a pathetic $50,000 settlement. He is currently sleeping soundly in my custom-built mansion, utterly convinced of his own supreme intelligence. If you move on him tonight, his high-powered corporate lawyers will tie you up in injunctions. We have to hit him when he is completely exposed and cut off from his resources." I proposed a precise, synchronized strike. I instructed the FBI and the IRS to execute their emergency asset freeze at exactly 8 o'clock on Friday morning. I wanted every single bank account, every offshore trust, and every domestic property locked down tight exactly 2 hours before my divorce mediation hearing. I wanted Marcus, Kyle, and Jasmine to walk into that courthouse completely oblivious to the fact that their entire empire had already been reduced to ash. The agents agreed. The timing was tactically flawless. They began printing the emergency federal injunctions and preparing the asset seizure warrants. I spent another 3 hours in that room signing sworn affidavits, officially transferring the digital chain of custody, and securing my federal whistleblower protections. When I finally walked out of the Richard B. Russell building, it was past 3 in the morning. The rain had cleared, leaving the Atlanta streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I hailed a ride back to the squalid, windowless motel room on the edge of the city. I unlocked the flimsy door and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale smoke and damp carpet, a stark reminder of the reality Marcus had tried to force upon me. I walked over to the small scratch closet and pulled out the clothes I had prepared for the hearing. Marcus had specifically commanded me to wear something cheap. He wanted me to look defeated, impoverished, and desperate. I laid out a faded, generic gray suit I had bought years ago at a discount store long before the millions started rolling in. I placed a scuffed pair of flat shoes next to it. I was going to give Marcus exactly the visual aesthetic he demanded. I was going to walk into that courthouse looking like a woman who had been utterly crushed by the weight of his superiority. I lay down on the stiff, uncomfortable motel bed and stared up at the water-stained ceiling. My heart was not racing. My hands were perfectly steady. I had spent 8 years building a titan, and I had just spent 8 hours dismantling him into absolute nothingness. Marcus thought he was the king of Atlanta, untouchable in his ivory tower. But tomorrow morning the king was going to learn a brutal lesson about the true cost of underestimating the architect. I closed my eyes and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep I had experienced in years. The trap was set, the federal warrants were signed, and Friday morning was coming. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky over Atlanta. I walked into the Fulton County Family Courthouse exactly at 9:30, a full 30 minutes early. I took my seat at the heavy oak table assigned to the respondent and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I was wearing the faded generic gray suit I had laid out in the motel room the night before. The fabric was stiff and unflattering, hanging loosely on my frame to give the distinct impression of a woman who had completely given up. My scuffed flat shoes were tucked quietly under the table. I wore no jewelry, no makeup, and absolutely nothing that would suggest I possessed an ounce of fight left in me. I sat perfectly still, breathing evenly, letting the quiet, sterile atmosphere of the courtroom wash over me. At exactly 9:55, the heavy double wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a dramatic, echoing thud. It was not just an entrance. It was a carefully choreographed theatrical arrival designed to assert absolute dominance. Marcus led the pack. He strode down the center aisle looking like a man arriving to collect a trophy rather than finalize a divorce. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal gray Brioni suit tailored to absolute perfection, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. As he walked, he deliberately adjusted his cuffs, making sure the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom caught the brilliant flash of his solid gold Rolex. He carried himself with the supreme confidence of a king, his chest puffed out, his chin tilted upward in sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He did not look like a man teetering on the edge of the financial ruin he had claimed in his sworn affidavits. He looked like a titan ready to crush a bug beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. Right behind him strolled his dedicated entourage. Kyle and Tara walked into the legal proceedings looking less like they were attending a serious court mediation and more like they had just secured VIP tickets to an exclusive weekend charity gala. Tara wore a pristine white designer dress, her loud ringing laughter echoing obnoxiously off the wood-paneled walls as Kyle leaned in to whisper a joke in her ear. Kyle wore a tailored navy blue pinstripe suit, his posture reeking of old money entitlement and extreme white privilege. He swaggered down the aisle with a relaxed, lazy gait, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. They took their seats in the very first row of the public gallery, completely disregarding the solemn, formal atmosphere of a courtroom. They were here purely for the entertainment value. They were here to eat popcorn and watch the lowly accountant get publicly humiliated and stripped of her dignity. But the grand finale of this highly offensive parade was Jasmine Cole. She strutted down the center aisle several paces behind the others, making sure her stiletto heels clicked as loudly and sharply as possible against the polished marble floor. She was actually wearing the exact same emerald green custom coat she had flaunted on her social media page, the one Marcus had barred me from packing when he threw me out into the rain. However, the true centerpiece of her outfit was draped deliberately over her forearm for maximum visibility. It was a Himalayan Birkin bag, one of the most exclusive, fiercely coveted, and insanely expensive handbags on the entire planet. It was a physical manifestation of laundered money, purchased with illicit cash, and tied directly to her own social security number. Jasmine walked right up to the low wooden partition separating the public gallery from the council tables. She stopped directly behind Marcus, looked down her nose at my faded gray suit, and let her eyes travel slowly up to my face. She offered a nasty, triumphant smirk, crossing her arms and tilting her head to make sure I fully absorbed her victory. She wanted me to see the Birkin bag. She wanted me to see my own coat wrapped around her shoulders. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of my absolute defeat. I did not react. I did not flinch. I did not glare, and I certainly did not cry. I simply sat there with perfect, unwavering serenity. If a camera had been circling me in that exact moment, tracking the stark visual contrast of the room, it would have captured a masterpiece of dramatic irony. On one side of the room was a loud, glittering display of fraudulent wealth dripping in designer labels and suffocating arrogance. On my side was quiet, lethal stillness. I watched them settle into their seats, my mind running a silent, continuous loop of the morning timeline. Marcus, Kyle, Tara, and Jasmine had spent their entire morning getting dressed up to gloat. They had been far too busy having their hair perfectly styled, selecting the right luxury watches, and coordinating their outfits to bother checking their banking applications. They had been too eager to rush to the courthouse and witness my surrender to check their corporate emails or answer calls from their overseas wealth managers. They were completely blissfully unaware that exactly 2 hours ago, at 8 o'clock on the dot, the federal government had simultaneously triggered a massive, highly coordinated asset freeze. While Marcus was tying his expensive silk tie in the mirror, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was executing search warrants on his commercial real estate empire, locking down every single domestic property in his portfolio. While Jasmine was deciding which of my stolen diamond tennis bracelets to wear to court, the Internal Revenue Service was seizing the Cayman Island offshore shell companies that she legally owned. While Kyle was laughing over his morning espresso, federal agents were freezing his corporate slush funds and seizing the dummy vendor accounts he had used to launder millions. They thought they were walking into this courtroom to finalize my destruction. They had absolutely no idea they had just walked onto a sinking ship completely cut off from every single dollar they thought they possessed. Marcus sat down at the petitioner table next to his high-priced, ruthless corporate attorney. The lawyer, a slick man with a shark-like grin, dropped a massive stack of heavily bound legal folders onto the table with a loud, intimidating thud. The sound was meant to make me jump, to remind me of the crushing paperwork and the phantom $12 million debt they were holding over my head. Marcus did not even bother looking toward the judge's empty bench. He turned his heavy leather chair, slightly leaning back and resting his arm over the backrest so he could look directly across the aisle at me. He looked me up and down, taking in the cheap gray suit and my completely unadorned appearance. A look of supreme, toxic satisfaction washed over his face. He had broken the woman who built him. He had stripped the architect of her power, replaced her with a compliant model, and forced her into total submission. The illusion of his absolute control was so intoxicating that he could not resist rubbing it in my face one final time before the judge arrived. Marcus leaned across the narrow aisle separating our tables. The cloying scent of his expensive cologne washed over me, a sharp contrast to the stale, polished wood scent of the courtroom. He lowered his voice, so only I could hear the venom dripping from his words. "Look at you," he whispered, a nasty, victorious smile playing on his lips. "You actually thought you were my equal. You thought fixing a few spreadsheets made you untouchable. Now look where you are. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. When the judge speaks, you are going to smile, nod, and sign exactly where my lawyer tells you to sign. If you even clear your throat the wrong way, I will drop that $12 million debt right on your head and watch it crush you into dust." He leaned back deliberately, shooting his cuffs to flash the gold Rolex again. "Game over, Nia. You are finished, loser." I kept my eyes locked straight ahead on the heavy wooden panels behind the judge's empty bench. I did not blink. I did not let my breathing change. I did not give him a single ounce of the satisfaction he was desperately craving. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice shattering the tense, heavy silence of the room. Judge Davis walked in from his chambers. He was a no-nonsense, seasoned family court judge with graying hair and a reputation for moving through his morning docket with ruthless efficiency. He took his seat, adjusted his reading glasses, and opened the thick, heavily tabbed file Marcus's legal team had submitted 48 hours prior. Marcus's attorney stood up immediately. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket with a theatrical, practiced flourish, projecting the aggressive aura of a man who was entirely used to bullying unrepresented spouses into rapid submission. "Good morning, Your Honor." The lawyer began, his voice booming across the room with a thick layer of artificial sympathy. "We are here today to finalize the dissolution of marriage between my client Marcus Davenport and the respondent Nia Davenport. My client has been incredibly forthcoming, transparent, and highly cooperative throughout this entire painful ordeal. As you can clearly see from the comprehensive financial disclosures submitted to the court, Davenport Commercial Real Estate has recently suffered catastrophic, unforeseen market losses. The lawyer paused, holding up a thick stack of bound papers as if they were a tragic casualty of the economy rather than a masterclass in federal perjury. What was once a thriving enterprise is now severely underwater. The lawyer continued, his tone dripping with fake solemnity. The company is currently carrying over $12 million in active corporate liabilities. The properties are vacant, the loans are being called in, and the liquid capital has completely evaporated. In the gallery behind us, I could hear Tara let out a soft stage sigh of feigned tragedy to really sell the performance. Kyle crossed his legs, looking supremely bored by the legal formalities of a crime he helped commit. Jasmine audibly checked her reflection in the screen of her phone, entirely unbothered by the supposed financial ruin of the man she was sleeping with. Despite these devastating financial blows, the slick lawyer continued pacing slowly in front of the judge's elevated bench. My client remains an honorable man. He recognizes his duty, and he wishes to provide a soft landing for his soon-to-be ex-wife. He is generously offering Mrs. Davenport a lump sum settlement of $25,000. This amount represents exactly half of the remaining liquid assets in the marital estate. He is doing this willingly, taking the entire burden of the massive $12 million corporate debt squarely onto his own shoulders to protect her from financial ruin. The lawyer stopped pacing for dramatic effect, letting the fake nobility of Marcus's offer hang heavily in the quiet air. Judge Davis scanned the top pages of the documents, his face a carefully blank mask. However, Your Honor. The attorney's tone abruptly shifted, turning razor-sharp and highly punitive, due to the respondent's refusal to vacate the premises promptly on the night of the separation and her continuous unfounded hostility, which has dragged out these preliminary proceedings, we are respectfully requesting a strict amendment to the settlement order. The attorney turned slightly, directing his aggressive gaze entirely onto me. We ask that Mrs. Davenport be held entirely responsible for all associated court fees today, he demanded. Furthermore, as a condition of receiving the $25,000, she must waive any and all rights to future financial discovery. She must sign a strict, ironclad, non-disclosure agreement protecting my client's privacy and business interests, and she must immediately surrender any remaining claims to the Davenport name. It was a brutal, merciless legal strangulation taking place in broad daylight. They were not just attempting to take my money and hide their criminal enterprise. They were actively trying to force me to pay for the privilege of being robbed. They wanted me gagged, legally bound, penniless, and burdened with administrative bills I supposedly could not afford. It was the ultimate display of patriarchal financial abuse. The attorney walked over to my solitary table. He did not hand the papers to me politely. He tossed the thick, heavy stack of settlement documents directly in front of me. The thick paper slapped loudly against the solid oak wood, the sound echoing in the silent room. He placed a sleek, expensive black pen right on top of the signature line. "Sign the papers!" Mrs. Davenport, the lawyer, commanded, not bothering to hide the blatant, dripping disrespect in his voice. "Accept the incredibly generous offer my client has extended to you today. Or we can proceed to full litigation where you will be forced to defend yourself against half of a $12 million deficit. The choice is yours, but I strongly suggest you pick up the pen." The courtroom was instantly thick with an oppressive, suffocating tension. The air felt heavy, almost hard to breathe. Behind me, I could hear Jasmine let out a quiet, mocking scoff. Kyle shifted his weight in the wooden pew, likely eager for me to hurry up and sign so they could all leave and celebrate their flawless victory at some overpriced brunch spot in Buckhead. Marcus sat back in his heavy leather chair, his arms confidently crossed over his chest. He was staring at the side of my face with a predatory intensity, waiting for the exact moment my spirit finally snapped. They had meticulously built a towering wall of intimidation completely around me. A high-powered, aggressive lawyer spouting relentless legal jargon. A fabricated mountain of terrifying corporate debt. A gallery full of arrogant, toxic people ready to laugh at my total downfall. To anyone else in that courtroom, I was a tragic, defeated woman, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, backed into an inescapable corner by powerful, wealthy men who held all the cards. The cruelty of it was overwhelmingly dark. The sheer, unadulterated injustice of watching Marcus sit there wearing a suit paid for by my sweat. alongside a mistress carrying a bag bought with my money, while demanding I pay the court fees for my own unfair eviction, was expertly designed to push human emotion to its absolute breaking point. The audience in the gallery was practically vibrating with malicious excitement, waiting to watch me break. Judge Davis looked down at me from his elevated bench. He saw a woman sitting completely alone. No high-priced attorney sitting by my side to object. No supportive family in the gallery to offer comfort. Just a solitary figure staring at a stack of incredibly hostile, life-ruining legal documents. Mrs. Davenport, Judge Davis said, his voice carrying a note of professional caution in the quiet room. You are present today without legal counsel. I must inform you that signing these documents will permanently waive your rights to contest any of the financial disclosures presented by the petitioner. You will have no legal recourse to seek additional assets. Do you fully understand the terms your husband's counsel has just outlined? Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into the side of my head. He was waiting for the tears to start falling. He was waiting for my shaking hands to reach out and pick up the black pen. He was waiting for the ultimate, absolute validation of his power over my life. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. The tension in the room was so thick it could choke a person. I did not look at the slick lawyer standing over me. I did not look at the pen resting on the fraudulent papers. And I absolutely did not look at Marcus. I slowly raised my head and looked directly into the eyes of Judge Davis. My posture remained perfectly straight. My hands remained calmly folded in my lap. I was not a victim cornered by a predator. I was the architect preparing to detonate the building. I understand the terms completely, Your Honor, I said. My voice was perfectly modulated, projecting clearly and calmly across the silent courtroom. However, I will not be signing those documents today, nor will I be signing them tomorrow or ever. The slick corporate attorney immediately bristled. He slammed his hand flat against the table, outraged that a seemingly destitute, unrepresented woman was daring to defy his script. Your Honor, the lawyer barked loudly. The respondent is wasting the court's time. She has been fully apprised of the massive liabilities my client is generously offering to shield her from. If she refuses to sign the mediated settlement, we move to litigate immediately and request that all associated legal fees be dumped directly onto her shoulders. Marcus leaned back, shaking his head with a theatrical display of pity. He leaned toward his microphone. She is just acting out of spite, Your Honor. She is emotional and irrational. I am simply trying to help her move on. I ignored his pathetic performance. I reached down to the floor and picked up my scuffed, unbranded briefcase. I set it on the heavy oak table. The rusted latches clicked loudly in the quiet room as I opened it. I did not pull out a massive stack of counterledgers. I did not produce tear-stained letters or desperate pleas for mercy. I reached inside and withdrew a single heavy, pristine white envelope. It was sealed tight, completely unadorned, except for a bold official stamp pressed into the wax on the back. Your Honor, I do not have a legal team present today because I do not require one to dispute these aggressively fabricated financial claims, I stated smoothly. Instead of engaging in a meaningless cyclical debate over balance sheets that my husband and his brother-in-law completely invented, I would like to submit a single piece of evidence for the court's immediate review. The opposing attorney practically tripped over his own expensive shoes to object. Objection, Your Honor. The respondent has missed the formal deadline for financial discovery by over a week. She cannot introduce random, unverified, and potentially inflammatory documents at a final settlement hearing simply to stall these proceedings. This is a desperate delay tactic. Judge Davis looked down at me. He evaluated my stoic, unwavering demeanor and contrasted it with the frantic, aggressive bluster of Marcus's attorney. In family court, judges have significant discretion when an unrepresented spouse claims financial fraud right before signing away their entire life. The objection is overruled for now, Judge Davis declared, his voice cutting through the lawyer's protests. I will review the respondent's submission before we finalize any settlement agreement on my docket. Bailiff, please bring that forward. The uniformed bailiff approached my solitary table. I picked up the sealed envelope and handed it to him. I felt the crisp, heavy paper leave my fingertips, the sound of the bailiff's heavy boots echoing across the marble floor as he carried the envelope up to the elevated bench felt like the ticking of a bomb. Marcus leaned across the aisle again, his voice dropping to a harsh, condescending whisper. You are embarrassing yourself, Nia. A fake letter begging for sympathy is not going to save you. You are going to pay my legal fees for this little stunt. I did not even blink. I kept my eyes locked on the judge. Judge Davis took the envelope from the bailiff. He picked up his silver letter opener and sliced through the thick paper. The ripping sound was the only noise in the entire courtroom. He pulled out the documents. I knew exactly what they looked like. They were not printed on standard printer paper. They were printed on heavy, watermarked federal stationery. They bore the official undeniable insignias of the United States Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service. Judge Davis began to read. Initially, his face retained that neutral, bored judicial mask he wore for every standard divorce case. He was fully expecting to read a desperate emotional plea from a heartbroken wife. But as his eyes scanned the first few lines, his posture shifted. His back straightened, his brow furrowed deeply. His eyes darted rapidly back to the top of the page. He adjusted his reading glasses, leaning much closer to the document, as if he needed to physically verify that he was reading the words correctly. The silence in the courtroom stretched. It became heavy, oppressive, and absolutely suffocating. On the other side of the aisle, the smug confidence radiating from the petitioner table began to fracture. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his heavy leather chair, his arrogant posture faltering just a fraction. The slick lawyer cleared his throat nervously, adjusting his silk tie, his predator instincts suddenly warning him of unseen danger. In the gallery behind us, Kyle and Tara completely stopped their whispering. Jasmine lowered her phone, her smug smirk slowly sliding off her face as she noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in the room's energy. Judge Davis flipped to the second page, his lips pressed tightly together. He read the signatures at the bottom of the federal affidavits. Then a strange, completely uncharacteristic sound escaped him. A sharp, loud exhale of breath. A chuckle. Then a genuine, undeniable burst of laughter echoed from the elevated bench. He covered his mouth with his hand, shaking his head in absolute stunned disbelief. He looked down at Marcus, then over to the slick corporate lawyer, and finally back to the federal documents in his hands. Oh, this is good, Judge Davis said quietly, directly into his microphone. The words dropped into the courtroom like a live grenade. The atmosphere instantly froze solid. The remaining arrogance in the room evaporated into thin air, replaced by a sudden paralyzing dread. Marcus's jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline. His lawyer immediately jumped to his feet, slamming his hands on the table, his voice rising in panic. Your Honor! The lawyer demanded, his professional composure completely unraveling. My client has a constitutional right to review whatever the respondent just handed you. We demand to see that document immediately. This is highly irregular. Judge Davis slowly stopped laughing. His expression shifted instantly from sheer amusement to a terrifying absolute judicial authority. He looked down at the slick, overpaid lawyer, his eyes cold and hard. Counselor Judge Davis said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I assure you, your client is going to review this document very shortly, along with a few other federal agents who are incredibly eager to speak with him. The slick corporate attorney froze completely. His jaw dropped and the aggressive, predatory posture he had maintained all morning vanished instantly. He looked at Judge Davis, then down at Marcus, his mind desperately trying to catch up to a reality he had not anticipated. Marcus blinked rapidly. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the heavy oak table. He tried to project his usual commanding authority, but his voice cracked, betraying the sheer terror rising in his throat. Your Honor, Marcus stammered, attempting a weak, dismissive laugh. There must be some sort of mistake. My ex-wife is clearly trying to pull a desperate stunt. Whatever forged document she handed you is a complete fabrication. Judge Davis did not laugh. He leveled a glare at Marcus that could have shattered bulletproof glass. Mr. Davenport, I assure you this is not a fabrication, the judge stated, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. You submitted a sworn legally binding affidavit to this court. You swore under penalty of perjury that your commercial real estate empire was crippled by a sudden $12 million debt. You swore that the total liquid value of your marital estate was $50,000. You asked this court to force your wife to walk away with $25,000 while you graciously shouldered the fabricated burden of a failed company. Marcus swallowed hard. The muscle in his jaw twitched violently. He opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Davis raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "What I hold in my hand is an emergency federal injunction." Judge Davis continued, lifting the crisp white paper for everyone to see. "It is an asset freeze and seizure order executed directly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. It was signed by a federal magistrate late last night based on overwhelming, irrefutable evidence of international money laundering and tax evasion." The slick attorney beside Marcus turned the color of ash. In the legal world, family lawyers do not want to be anywhere near federal RICO cases or IRS criminal investigations. The attorney slowly began sliding his legal pads back into his expensive briefcase. He was physically distancing himself from his own client, right in the middle of a hearing. "Your Honor?" The lawyer interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. "For the record, my firm had absolutely no knowledge of any federal investigation or offshore accounts. The financial disclosures were prepared exclusively by the client and his chief financial officer. We relied on their sworn statements." "I suggest you secure your own legal counsel, counselor," Judge Davis replied coldly. "Because according to this federal mandate, there is no $50,000 to divide today. In fact, there is no marital estate left to adjudicate in this family court." Marcus shot up from his heavy leather chair. His face was a mask of absolute, unadulterated panic. "What do you mean there is no estate?" he demanded, completely abandoning courtroom decorum. "That is my money. Those are my companies." "Not anymore," Judge Davis fired back. "According to the Department of Justice, every single entity tied to Davenport Holdings has been classified as the proceeds of an illicit criminal syndicate. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, while you were walking through the security checkpoint of this building, federal agents seized total control of your entire empire." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. "I sat perfectly still, watching the invincible titan of Atlanta real estate crumble into a terrified, broke criminal in real time." Judge Davis put on his reading glasses and began to read the itemized list of seized assets aloud. His voice was steady and merciless, delivering blow after blow. "The $25 million you hid in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands has been seized," the judge read. "The federal government has locked down the network of shell companies you used to wash illicit cash through fake commercial leases. The Buckhead estate you currently reside in has been seized. Your entire portfolio of downtown commercial properties has been seized. Every single corporate and personal bank account bearing your name or the name of your company has been completely frozen." Marcus sank back into his chair. He looked as if he had been physically struck. He stared at his hands, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He had walked into the room believing he was a multimillionaire playing a game of financial chess. He had just been informed that he did not even own the expensive suit he was currently wearing, but Judge Davis was not finished. He turned his attention to the gallery, looking directly past the wooden partition to where Kyle and Tara were sitting. "The federal injunction does not stop at the primary petitioner." The judge continued, his eyes locking onto Kyle. "The order explicitly targets the chief financial officer of Davenport Holdings. The dummy vendor accounts, the fraudulent domestic limited liability companies, and the personal accounts of the CFO have all been frozen by the federal government." In the first row of the gallery, Kyle let out a sharp, choked sound. The smug, aristocratic arrogance that had defined his entire existence completely vanished. His face turned a sickly pale shade of green. He gripped the wooden pew in front of him, his knuckles turning white. He realized in that exact moment that his old money name and his white privilege were not going to save him from a federal indictment. He had tied his entire life to Marcus's fraudulent empire, and the government had just burned it to the ground. Tara grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with frantic confusion, but Kyle could not even look at her. He was staring at the floor, trapped in a waking nightmare. And finally, Judge Davis said, turning his gaze to Jasmine, "The injunction specifically outlines the seizure of all proxy assets. The federal government has identified that the offshore shell companies were legally registered under the name of Jasmine Cole. Therefore, all assets acquired with laundered funds tied to those entities are currently being confiscated." Jasmine froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. This includes, but is not limited to, the Porsche Panamera currently parked in the courthouse lot, which federal agents are towing as we speak, the judge read flawlessly. It includes all high-value jewelry, designer clothing, and luxury goods purchased with company funds. The government has a full inventory of the items acquired over the last 6 months. Jasmine let out a loud, high-pitched gasp. The majestic, incredibly expensive Himalayan Birkin bag slipped from her grasp. It hit the polished marble floor with a heavy, dull thud, tumbling over and spilling her makeup and keys across the aisle. She did not even reach down to pick it up. She looked at Marcus, her eyes begging for him to do something to fix it, to use his power to make the nightmare stop. But Marcus had no power left. He was staring blankly at the solid gold Rolex on his wrist. He was slowly realizing that the watch, the suit, the shoes, and the very swagger he carried himself with were entirely funded by a criminal enterprise that I had just handed over to the FBI. He was bankrupt. He was destitute. He was exactly where he had tried to put me, staring down the barrel of total, inescapable ruin. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a tear. I had simply sat at my table, let the legal system do its job, and watched my husband and his toxic family lose absolutely everything they valued in the span of 5 minutes. The sheer, overwhelming silence of their destruction was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The silence in the courtroom broke with the sudden, violent sound of pure panic. Kyle leaped to his feet from the wooden pew in the gallery. He was gasping for air, his face completely drenched in sweat. His tailored navy suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. He tugged frantically at his silk tie, his chest heaving as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him. Kyle knew exactly what a federal asset freeze meant. He knew the FBI had breached his servers. He knew the IRS was already tearing through his sloppy, amateurish ledgers. He turned toward Marcus, his voice cracking in absolute terror, demanding to know what Marcus had done. But Marcus had no answers. Marcus was completely paralyzed in his chair. Next to Kyle, Tara sat frozen in a state of catatonic shock. Her pristine white designer dress offered no protection against the federal storm that had just decimated her comfortable, arrogant life. She watched her husband completely unravel, realizing that their entire country club lifestyle, their lavish charity galas, and their unearned social superiority were built on a criminal enterprise that was now entirely in the hands of the Department of Justice. Then Jasmine started to scream. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was a loud, hysterical, ugly wail that echoed sharply off the high ceilings. She dropped to her knees right there in the center aisle, her hands pulling frantically at her carefully styled hair. She screamed that she did not know anything. She shouted that Marcus had made her sign those offshore papers. She sobbed that she just wanted the clothes and the cars, begging the judge to believe that she was only an assistant. She pointed a shaking finger directly at Marcus, screaming that he had set her up to take the fall for his international money laundering ring. Her tears ruined her expensive makeup, leaving thick, dark streaks running down her cheeks. The incredibly rare Himalayan Birkin bag remained completely forgotten on the marble floor next to her trembling knees. Judge Davis banged his heavy wooden gavel hard against the sounding block, demanding immediate order in his courtroom. The sharp, loud crack echoed like a gunshot, slicing through the chaos and silencing Jasmine's frantic hysterics. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his utility belt, ensuring the room returned to absolute stillness. Judge Davis then turned his attention directly to me. His expression softened from judicial fury to a look of profound, respectful acknowledgement. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the final page of the federal document. Mrs. Davenport, the judge, said, his voice carrying clearly and calmly across the room. I see here that the Department of Justice has formally recognized your extensive cooperation in this matter. You have been granted full federal protection under the whistleblower statutes. You are entirely cleared of any liability regarding the fraudulent financial disclosures submitted by your husband and his legal counsel today. Marcus snapped his head up. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. His arrogant facade finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He was slowly putting the puzzle together. He realized I had not just stumbled upon his secrets by accident. I had actively packaged his entire criminal empire, tied it up with a neat digital bow, and handed it directly to the federal government. But the absolute final nail in his coffin was yet to come. The judge continued reading the federal mandate, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Furthermore, the court acknowledges your official status with the Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Office. The government has seized approximately $25 million in illicit funds and properties this morning. Under federal law, a whistleblower who provides actionable intelligence leading to a successful recovery is legally entitled to a mandatory percentage of the seized assets. Judge Davis looked right at Marcus, delivering the lethal, undeniable blow. The Internal Revenue Service has guaranteed Mrs. Davenport a minimum 15% reward of the total recovered amount. That equates to a fully guaranteed, legally protected sum of $3,750,000. Clean, tax-free, and completely untouched by this divorce proceeding. The massive number hung in the air, heavy and absolutely devastating. Marcus physically slumped forward, his head dropping toward the heavy oak table. The man who had mocked me, the man who had frozen my bank accounts, the man who had generously offered me a pathetic $25,000 to walk away quietly, was now realizing the magnificent magnitude of his defeat. I had not just survived his attempt to leave me destitute and homeless. I had legally, brilliantly secured almost $4 million of his own illegal fortune. I had used the federal government as my personal collection agency. I was walking away with millions in clean, untraceable capital, fully protected by the United States government. Marcus, Kyle, and Jasmine were walking away with absolutely nothing but massive federal indictments and the terrifying promise of a very long prison sentence. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked at the slick corporate attorney who was frantically shoving his legal pads into his briefcase, terrified of being associated with a federal racketeering case. I looked at Tara, who was openly weeping as her husband hyperventilated beside her. I looked at Jasmine, curled on the floor, mourning the end of her stolen luxury lifestyle. Finally, I looked at Marcus. He slowly lifted his head and met my gaze. There was no arrogance left in his eyes. There was no superiority. There was only the hollow, terrified realization that he had played a high-stakes game of chess against a grandmaster, and he had lost every single piece on the board. The massive wealth he had flaunted so proudly had officially been transferred to the only person in the room who actually deserved it. Before anyone in the courtroom could even draw a breath to process the staggering magnitude of the judge's ruling, the heavy double doors at the back of the chamber flew open with a violent, echoing crash. A coordinated team of federal agents strode purposefully down the center aisle. They were not wearing bespoke tailored suits or flashing luxury gold watches. They wore dark tactical vests, bearing the bold, undeniable yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The absolute reality of federal law enforcement had officially arrived to collect its dues. The lead agent marched briskly past Jasmine, who was still curled on the marble floor, weeping over her lost luxury lifestyle. He bypassed the wooden partition and stepped directly up to the petitioner table, flanked instantly by two armed deputies. Marcus Davenport, the self-proclaimed untouchable titan of Atlanta real estate, did not even try to run. He sat entirely frozen in his heavy leather chair. His custom charcoal gray suit, suddenly looked like a hollow, ill-fitting costume draped over a terrified, broken man. "Marcus Davenport, stand up and place your hands behind your back," the lead agent commanded. His voice was sharp, authoritative, and left absolutely zero room for negotiation or charm. "You are under arrest for federal racketeering, international money laundering, wire fraud, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus slowly rose to his feet, his legs trembling so violently he could barely support his own weight. The metallic heavy click of the steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists rang out sharply in the quiet room. It was the definitive sound of a corrupt empire collapsing into absolute dust. Simultaneously in this gallery, two other federal agents hauled Kyle roughly to his feet. The arrogant old money chief financial officer who had laughed at me in the freezing rain was now sobbing openly. He offered zero resistance as the cold steel cuffs locked around his own wrists. He looked pale, weak, and utterly pathetic, completely stripped of the unearned privilege he had wielded like a weapon his entire life. Tara shattered the remaining silence of the room. She lunged forward, grabbing wildly at the tactical sleeves of the federal agents, completely abandoning her polished high society persona. She screamed her husband's name, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. She begged the agents to stop demanding they check their records, insisting there had to be a catastrophic mistake because men like Kyle did not go to federal prison. Her aristocratic facade dissolved instantly into a messy, hysterical display of absolute desperation. She clawed at the air, watching her entire country club existence evaporate before her very eyes. I calmly stood up from my solitary table. I smoothed out the non-existent wrinkles of my cheap, faded gray suit. I reached down, wrapped my fingers around the handle of my scuffed briefcase, and turned to walk down the center aisle. My movements were measured, deliberate, and entirely unbothered by the federal raid unfolding mere feet away from me. Marcus caught my eye as the agents began to march him roughly toward the exit. The toxic arrogance that had defined his entire personality was completely gone. It was replaced entirely by the panicked, pleading eyes of a terrified boy who had finally been caught. He planted his expensive leather shoes against the marble floor, resisting the agents just long enough to twist his body toward me. "Nia, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking in total humiliation as the agents shoved him forward. "Please tell them. You know me. We built this together. I am sorry. I was stupid. I will give you whatever you want. Just please fix this. You know how to fix the numbers. Please, Nia." I did not stop walking. I did not break my stride. I did not raise my voice, and I did not even offer him the satisfaction of a vindictive smile. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into a thunderstorm, the man who had tried to bury me under $12 million of fabricated debt to fund his infidelity, and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left to give him. There was no sadness. There was only profound, liberating emptiness. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my gaze locked dead ahead on the heavy wooden doors leading out of the courtroom. As I walked past him, my vision narrowed and my focus sharpened with absolute clarity. Every footstep I took was steady, rhythmic, and grounded in pure victory. The chaotic scene unfolding behind me began to fade. The screaming sister-in-law grasping at the agents, the sobbing mistress curled around a fallen luxury handbag, the terrified ex-husband pleading desperately for a mercy he never earned, all of it blurred into a dull, insignificant mess. Their frantic voices became muted, distant background noise completely irrelevant to my brilliant future. They were no longer titans. They were just criminals being processed into the system. I pushed open the heavy courtroom doors and stepped out into the brightly lit, quiet hallway, leaving the utter wreckage of the Davenport family exactly where it belonged, securely in the hands of the federal government. I stopped at the end of the wide marble corridor and pressed the silver button for the elevator. The cool metal felt grounding under my fingertips. Before the heavy brass doors could slide open, the courtroom doors behind me burst open once more. The federal agents were clearing the room, marching the rest of the criminal enterprise out toward the holding elevators. Jasmine was dragged out first. The heavy steel cuffs on her wrists forced her arms into an awkward, unnatural angle. She was no longer the smug, untouchable mistress parading around Buckhead in my stolen designer clothes. The woman who had proudly broadcasted her theft to the entire Atlanta elite was now a terrified, sobbing 28-year-old facing a massive federal indictment. When she saw me standing quietly by the elevator bank, she planted her feet. She tried to pull away from the stern federal agent gripping her arm, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "Nia, please!" Jasmine cried out. Her voice echoed shrilly down the long, polished hallway, completely stripped of its former arrogance. "You have to tell them the truth. Tell them I was just an assistant. Tell them Marcus forced me to sign those offshore papers. I did not know what they meant. I did not know it was dirty money from organized crime. You know how he is. You know he manipulated me. Please, I just wanted a nice life. You know I am innocent." I turned slowly and looked at her. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the woman who had happily moved into my home, driven my car, and publicly mocked my pain while I sat shivering in a cheap motel. "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense against federal tax evasion, Jasmine," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, devoid of any sympathy or anger. "You wanted the perks of being the boss wife. You mocked me online while racking up debt on a Porsche Panamera that I was legally paying for. You wanted the custom mansion, the imported champagne, and the Himalayan Birkin bag. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. But being the boss wife also means you are the one who signs the international tax returns. Enjoy the luxury lifestyle. I hear the federal prison uniforms come in a lovely shade of orange." Jasmine let out a devastated, broken wail. Her legs gave out, and the agent had to physically hoist her up by her arms to keep her moving toward the freight elevator. Right behind her was Kyle. Two armed deputies were escorting the former chief financial officer of Davenport Holdings. Kyle was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, untouchable man who had casually sipped expensive whiskey while mocking my trauma in the pouring rain was entirely gone. His face was blotchy pale and slick with cold sweat. His breathing was rapid and shallow, bordering on full hyperventilation. He looked exactly like a man who finally realized his old money family connections and his country club memberships were absolutely useless against a federal racketeering charge. When Kyle locked eyes with me, he actually tried to stop walking. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated desperation. This was the man who had laughed at my pain. This was the man who had confidently threatened to bleed me dry with ruthless corporate lawyers and drag my name through the mud. Now he was looking at me like I was his only lifeline. "Nia," Kyle gasped, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Nia, listen to me. We can fix this. You do not have to do this. I can give you full access to the secondary domestic trusts. I can make sure you get everything you want. You are brilliant. You are a financial genius. Just please call the agents off. Tell the IRS it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was just following Marcus's orders. I cannot go to federal prison. My family reputation will be destroyed. Tara will be ruined. Please, Naya, show some mercy." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The deputies paused for just a fraction of a second, allowing me to look this arrogant, mediocre man directly in the eyes. I looked at his expensive, tailored suit, his sweating brow, and his terrified, pleading expression. I thought about the night he stood comfortably under his heated carriage house, looking down his nose at me, relishing my total destruction. He had relied on his privilege his entire life to shield him from the consequences of his own incompetence. I tilted my head, studying him with cold, clinical detachment. "You know, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft, so he had to strain to hear my final verdict. "You gave me some excellent advice the night you and Marcus threw me out into the storm. You told me to remember my place. You told me I was mathematically eliminated before the bell even rang." Kyle swallowed hard, thick tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "Nia, I was stupid. I was so arrogant. I was wrong. I am so sorry." I stepped even closer, lowering my voice into a lethal, icy whisper. "You were right about one thing, Kyle. I am just a lowly accountant. I am a glorified calculator from a working-class neighborhood. But you made a catastrophic miscalculation. You forgot that I am the one who holds your numbers. And today your numbers completely ran out." The elevator chime rang out with a sharp, clear ping behind me. The heavy brass doors slid smoothly open. I turned my back on Kyle as he let out a choked, desperate sob. I stepped into the empty elevator car and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the heavy doors slowly slid shut, the final image I saw was the mighty, arrogant chief financial officer of the Davenport Empire being shoved roughly into a federal holding elevator, completely broken, completely defeated, and entirely out of time. I stepped out of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building and took a deep breath of the crisp Atlanta air. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me, completely cutting off the chaotic aftermath of my former life. That was exactly 2 years ago. Today, I am sitting in the center of my own sprawling penthouse overlooking the very same city skyline. The sunset is casting a brilliant golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I reach over to my custom marble kitchen island and pour myself a generous glass of vintage red wine. I take a slow, satisfying sip, feeling absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated freedom. The justice system moved with surprising speed once they had the immaculate digital roadmap I provided. They did not even need to go to a lengthy, drawn-out trial. The financial evidence was so overwhelming and so perfectly curated that the federal prosecutors completely cornered them. Marcus, the man who believed he was an untouchable titan, pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal racketeering, wire fraud, and international tax evasion. The judge did not show him an ounce of mercy. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The man who obsessed over custom Italian suits and solid gold watches is now wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit, permanently stripped of his title, his wealth, and his freedom. He has absolutely no empire left to rule. Kyle thought his old money family connections could buy him a convenient plea deal. He was devastatingly wrong. The federal government seized every single asset tied to his name, including the domestic trusts he thought were incredibly secure. His direct involvement in managing the money laundering ring earned him 10 years in federal prison, but the collateral damage of his arrogance completely decimated his household. Tara, the sister-in-law who stood on her heated porch and viciously mocked my fertility, was left with absolutely nothing. The government seized her pristine carriage house, the luxury vehicles, and her personal bank accounts. Tara was forced to file for total humiliating bankruptcy. She was officially expelled from all her prestigious charity boards and elite country clubs, her carefully curated social standing entirely eradicated. She now lives in a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a minimum wage retail job. She is forced to experience the exact financial desperation she once laughed at me for facing. And then there is Jasmine, the ambitious assistant who paraded around in my stolen clothes and flaunted my luxury car on social media, learned a very harsh lesson about corporate liability. Because she eagerly signed her name as the registered agent for the offshore shell companies, she was held legally accountable for the laundered funds. Her desperate claims of ignorance in the courtroom did not save her from a federal conviction. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Her Himalayan Birkin bag and her temporary status as the boss wife cost her her freedom and her entire future. As for me, the Internal Revenue Service honored their whistleblower guarantee to the exact letter. 6 months after the federal raid, a heavily encrypted wire transfer cleared into my newly established, fiercely protected private accounts. $3,750,000. It was completely clean, fully legal, and entirely tax-free. I did not use the money to buy flashy cars or seek validation from Atlanta high society. I used my analytical mind to build a legitimate empire of my own. I opened a boutique forensic accounting and private investment firm. We specialize in high-level corporate audits, but we also run a highly dedicated pro bono division. My firm specifically helps women who are facing financial abuse in high-conflict divorces. We track hidden assets, we expose fraudulent corporate structures, and we ensure that arrogant, toxic men can never weaponize money to trap their spouses. I took the exact skills Marcus used to build his fraudulent life and turned them into an impenetrable shield for women who need it most. I take another sip of my wine, leaning back into my plush leather sofa as the city lights begin to sparkle brilliantly outside my window. I want every single woman listening to this to pay very close attention. Never let an insecure, arrogant man convince you that your quiet strength is a weakness. Never let someone who heavily relies on your brilliance try to tell you that you are easily replaceable. When they attempt to shrink you, when they try to put you in your place, do not waste your energy screaming or begging for their basic respect. They are simply not capable of understanding your worth. Instead, you use your mind. You gather your resources. You let them become sloppy, blinded by their own massive egos and unearned entitlement. You let them believe they have won the game right up until the exact moment you flip the entire board upside down. Sometimes the absolute best revenge is not an explosive argument. The best revenge is total calculated silence while you let their own profound stupidity dig their graves. You just have to be smart enough to quietly hand them the shovel. I survived the freezing storm they threw me into, and I came back ruling the entire climate. If you found this story satisfying, if you love seeing toxic, arrogant people get the exact karma they deserve, please leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of absolute justice and women taking back their power. Remember to protect your peace, always know your worth, and never let anyone underestimate what you are capable of achieving. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.